Okay, hello everyone. It will be not affordable, I think.
Well, we kind of set the bar high up, so that's going to be interesting.
All right, so we would like to tell you a little bit about disaster in recovery or recovery disaster or just disaster, because in most cases this is just the disaster.
I still have some gray hairs from the last DR we did.
All right, so raise your hand if you are an engineer, software engineer, DevOps, whatever.
Okay, we got guys going for that.
So now raise your hand if you heard about business continuity. Ha, I knew it.
That's impressive. I kind of expected a lower number. That's pretty good.
Who heard about disaster recovery? A little bit more. Perfect.
Okay, and we're sorry for the next question. It's going to be one of the worst and hardest questions you're going to probably ever hear on this conference, but raise your hand if you have ever planned and or executed the disaster recovery.
All right, but we didn't finish yet. Who tests disaster recovery?
Still better than backups in some cases, isn't it?
Somehow I don't believe it. Anyway, okay, good. Because, having disaster recovery without testing it means that you do not have disaster recovery, simply speaking. All right, so this are we. So, Filip.
Yeah, so I'm Filip. I've been working for past 4 to 5 years in Tameshi. I'm most specialized in BAU operations, mostly experienced in banking sector, as well as some retail and telecommunications. I also assist companies with auditing, as well as occasional security. And I also, as was mentioned, coordinate events. If you're from Poland and you know some conventions, you probably heard of a small thing called PIRCon. I do unfortunately run with that in my free time. So yeah, but free time is a myth and I still cannot find if it exists.
Right, so as was mentioned already, I'm also in Tameshi for 7-8 months now. I'm as a cloud solution architect, also AWS community builder, Docker captain, CD Foundation ambassador, DevOps Institute ambassador, and I don't know what is free time, really. And also a little bit of private stuff. Please join my YouTube channel because I need more subscriptions. I want to live from it. Okay, so what is the business continuity? Who can tell us what is business continuity? And in fact, business continuity plans as well.
Anyone? Don't worry, we don't bite.
In simple words, business continuity plan means that you plan how your business will continue work if something happens.
And we know it does happen eventually. It's a matter of when, not if it happens.
Exactly, exactly. And also when you will know that something happened. Do you have like customer-driven monitoring? Your service is not working. Oh, really? Right?
Does your infrastructure support faults across multiple levels?
Exactly. So also, what is the strategy for you to work with that, right? And what is disaster recovery, right? So this is also interesting. Many of you raise your hand. So those of you who raise the hand, what is disaster recovery, please? You will not leave this room if we don't hear the answer.
Okay, that kind of works, synonymous to incident or problem resolution, but in fact the simplest way to put disaster recovery is trying to blow something up and then seeing what exactly fails so you can patch it up with even more tape or fix it properly, but that's more into tech debt.
Exactly.
And we know that exists.
And as you will see very soon, it's not only about going back to business, but how to prevent the need of going back to business.
Or mitigate the costs related with an incident.
Exactly. So, a short info and introduction into the disaster recovery classification, because disaster recovery, as usual, is not that simple. We are DevOps here. We like to complicate things. We build something simple what have like 2 components. We use 55 different tools to bring them up, right?
Yes, and there is one important caveat. While the topics we're going to be discussed are fitting across all types of environments, we have most experience working with the Amazon services. But that being said, still, What are we presenting here is going to apply for any type of environment, just the tool's naming or specificity might be different. So your mileage may vary.
And let's be honest, I am AWS community builder. I have to have some activities, so that's why we will talk about AWS.
But all right, circling back, so let's start actually. So we do have those 4 classes, but what exactly is the deal with them? What do they offer differently?
So generally, we can say the most important part here is how, if you allow your system to be down, and how long it will take to bring it back, in simple words, and how much data and transaction you are allowed to lost. Okay, that's why we have this RPO, RTOs, things, and so on and so on and so on. Restore point objective, restore time objective, right? So how long it will take to bring back your service, restore time objective,
and RPO is what's the latest point you can restore to in case of a failure.
Exactly.
So backups.
Exactly, and this has very close relation to SLI, SLIs, and other SLXs.
All types of three-letter acronyms. We're not talking about three-letter agencies in this case, don't worry about that.
Even though we DevOps love abbreviations, right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
So we have the main top split is between active and passive type of disaster recoveries, right? So it means, passive means that in some way you need time to bring back things. There is potential downtime, longer, shorter. You see there, this RPO, RTO is hours, right? So very often it is like create all infrastructure in the cloud, restore the backups, and so on and so on and so on. And also the active part.
Yeah, so pretty much it can be also summed up in a way that it's a linear scale. The less you pay, the longer the restore time is going to be. So if you're going to be going for backup and restore in this case, you're not going to be paying a lot because you're essentially just buying for backups. But as it's displayed in this specific scenario, you may be talking about hours to restore. We have unfortunately experienced those cases, and those restorations are always pretty long, but they're not that costly, even if you have high-size environment. And the higher you go up in pricing, of course, you're going to be cutting down on time. But there is, of course, point of, I would say, diminishing returns. If the more you're going to pay for active-passive scenario, you're not going to be getting as much benefit as at one point going active-active. But what is that point again? It's always it's a universal answer to any kind of typical technical question. If you're asked by anyone, let's say from non-technical side or from management side, what is the best thing for XYZ? Always the answer is, it depends.
As usual, yeah? This is the best answer from DevOps, it depends. But imagine, you are flying a plane on the flight level, right? And something happened with the computer of this plane. Would you like to restore the operational part of this computer in hours, or you prefer real time?
And we're not talking about Boeing in this case.
Yeah. So, to work with the imagination. And of course, this kind of backup and restore is the cheapest option. Because if you have active-active, and in the full power of active-active, you will pay a lot. At least twice, if not more.
Usually more, but you can also picture it in a pretty, I would say, simple way. If you know King's New Close, the old animation, it's literally going as pull the lever cronk to switch over to the secondary site in case of a disaster. So you pay over 2 times more, usually even more, I would say 3 or 4 times for simplicity of just pushing technically one button to fully switch over the traffic.
Exactly. And another cost which you have to calculate in this is also the networking cost.
Oh yeah, we don't talk about that.
Let's not talk about this. Okay, let's go further. So all of this is good in theory, right? But as we all know, the theory is not always going in the same direction like the practice. So that's why we need to think about problems. And I already saw a couple of you did what I expected to happen.
Yeah, I still don't like the idea of what we did, but it's amusing what you pulled.
Exactly.
So the thing is with faults is that who knows Murphy's laws? Yeah, so most of you, but for those that don't know it, Murphy's laws are essentially can be simplified to if something is going to break, it will break, and it will break at the worst possible moment. And this is also the case with DRs, because you're going to run into problems, because it's never simple.
And this is exactly why, because of this, right? So if something can happen, it will happen, and if it is nasty enough, it will come back.
Yeah, if you think you pulled all 20 layers of tape on your systems and infrastructure, there's always at least 5 more layers that you need to pull to see what's really going on.
Yes, exactly. So now let's go into a couple of elements, areas, which we should remember when we talk about business continuity, about creating and configuring and planning DR. Okay?
Yeah, so let's start off with data retention. So as we know, you theoretically can mitigate the data safety for disaster recovery in no matter which scenario, if it's continuous replication, if it's just backup and restore. But as we all know, at least in the tools that we know, well, if you enable replication, you're not just going to shove data or just move all the data. You're just going to start replicating it. So how can we actually ensure that if we start off the creation of disaster recovery or fault-tolerant infrastructure, how can we ensure that all the data is there? It's just flicking a lever, and then when we actually need to switch over, we just see that we don't have all the data, which is a common concern.
Yeah, so let's start with this, that everything starts with backups, right? And let's do backups in the right way. Not like in this meme that our laptop was like burned, but luckily we have backup. Well, the bad luck is that backup we store in this laptop as well.
Yeah, I am the case of that, unfortunately.
Everyone had, probably. So, especially if we talk about cloud providers, they provide a lot of tools and built-in elements in the services you can use. And it doesn't matter if it is AWS, GCP, Azure, Alibaba, whatever, which you can use. But the case I really want to point out, how many of you works with S3 from AWS? So, as you know, all clouds have the regional and global functionalities and services, right? And we can say that, for example, AWS has also these two, but in fact, they have like 2.5.
Yes, and S3 is one of them. So yes. The most common conception about this specific edge case of S3 is that, well, theoretically, it has global naming. If you have one bucket name reserved, it cannot be taken anywhere else globally. And you would think that the backbone of S3 is global. Well, it's not. It's regional at the same time. Yes. So in case of a disaster recovery, it has been a legit case in one of the DRs we did for cross-region scenarios for one of our customers. We run into that, and because we wanted to ensure lower latencies for the secondary region in case of a disaster, we found out that we can actually specifically region lock the data, still ensuring GDPR compliance, of course, because that is also a concern, in another region, but we still cannot use the name. So that was kind of a neat trick that, well, S3 is an oddball indeed among those services because it's 2.5 types of service when it comes to region placement.
So
that's fun days.
Yeah, so if you have your service, do not hard code the bucket name, please.
Neither the access keys, please.
Do not hard code anything, really. Except password, of course, right?
Yeah, but most of the things, of course, cutting this banter a bit short, is that pretty much it comes down, as Paweł said, to backup. Usually any kind of cloud provider has some kind of the backup vault service. In case of AWS, is the backups vaults. I'm pretty certain that Azure or GCP have their own specific namings, but usually it's just semantics when it comes to tool names in the cloud providers. They mostly function in a very similar way. Of course, it's not identical, but they can always be pretty much translated in 90% accuracy. Just change the names.
Exactly, and here we need to mention the terms from AWS, but they are really global, the high availability and fault tolerance. Because very often we use them like it is the same, but this is completely different. And high availability will mean that you will, for example, select the standard S3 bucket. It means that your data is stored in 3 different zones in one region. High availability in this case means that your information, your data, your workload is spread in one region. If the atom bomb will be big enough, this region will go down. Okay? That's why you have fault tolerance, which means that your data is split or directed or replicated into different regions.
I mean, if a nuke is going to drop at the region site, I would say we have bigger concerns than that, but that point stands.
Yes, and then we can come back to 2016 when a big shit happens in AWS and S3 went down for 3 days and like 80% of the internet was off. That was the time. And then we realized that this like regional, semi-regional service is in fact global, right? So here also the important element is don't overcomplicate things. Because if you use cloud providers, you don't use, well, sometimes we say there is no cloud, there is someone else's computer. But it's not one computer. It's not one switch. It's not one network. It's not one storage. It's distributed. Okay? So the small issue on the vendor side is not a big problem if you do things right. If there is a problem on their side, I guarantee you that you have bigger problem than just, I don't know, not accessible S3 bucket. Right? And you are not alone if this is in any way, comforting.
I mean, even if your bucket is properly configured, we still remember the case of paying for denied requests. Those were fun days.
Yes, and in this case, doesn't matter what kind of strategy for DR you will select. Always use the tools offered by the vendor, and no, it's not like a vendor lock, okay? Because if you select Agile, you also are in vendor lock style of work. And things like AWS Backup will go with us through almost every slide now. So
yep. That's pretty much the backbone. So even if you don't want to do DRs, run your backups, please. Okay, my most favorite or second most favorite topic.
I'm just going, bye.
Yeah, networking. In 90% of the cases, we can for once say, anytime we resolve cases with disaster recovery or incidents, it's not DNS this time.
It's always DNS, come on.
This one's not. This one is just the fact of you have to replicate the whole setup of networking to a secondary distribution zone. So you can imagine it can be difficult because usually if you are talking about fault-tolerant networking, you cannot mimic the whole networking setup. So you unfortunately, at least in cloud providers, you usually have to provide or optimize your architecture or modify it a bit to ensure you can still provide accessibility without much changes or incurring triple times the cost, which has been the case. However, cloud providers do, I believe, have some tweaks to make your life easier, at least when it comes to AWS. I'm pretty sure Azure.
Do they?
I would say yes. With actually, we can thank the DNS services in this case, and this is more of a serious note, for the health checks. It's a very simple tool which can save your, I would say, save your back multiple times in case you have a regional failure and services in your region down. You can leverage the DNS services and DNS health checks to automatically switch over or at least speed up the switch over, and not only just for content delivery networks like CloudFront, Cloudflare, or anything. This can be also applied to compute services and database systems. Exactly. Because it's not always that everything goes down. It's more often than not, it's going to be one type of service that is failing. So we can actually plan, even if we don't want to do a proper secondary environment for a full-time environment, we can still leverage some parts of networking tools that we have from the provider. And we can still ensure that we actually get the notification that, hey, system XYZ is down, mind taking a look at it. That is assuming the monitoring system doesn't go down.
Who cares about monitoring?
We unfortunately do as BAU.
Here what we can do, all providers allows us to work with DNS a little bit even differently than we used to do it before, right? We have different scenarios. We can do some failovers on the DNS level. So on the top level, really, where the traffic is reaching your organization, you can manage this traffic depends on the, let's say, stability of the environment you have below, right? Also, all things related to connections between your regions, your on-prem stuff, your other clouds, and a lot of things you can connect together, but please remember always that you have to have redundancy in that, because something can always happen. And in most cases, this will be the, well, mistake, typo, whatever you do in the code.
Or someone cutting off the fiber cable because they thought it's another type of wire in the ground.
Because in case of vendors, usually it's, again, a person who do one enter too much. This was the case with S3 in 2016.
Yes, and we also have to remember, at least in case of hybrid connectivity, if we're going to be talking about the on-premise to provider, external provider, or external data center connection. There, of course, it's nice to have redundancy, but another important thing to factor in is compliance with your local regulations. In case you cannot transfer specific type of data over the internet, well, VPN might not be the best solution. So, again, your mileage may vary, but please take into consideration any type of regulations, especially regarding data transfers, because regulators can be pretty strict in case something breaks.
Please remember, VPN is not necessarily the security tool. Okay? All right, we need to speed up a little bit, so let's go to computing services. And I believe, like next to storages and how we store the data, this is the easiest part which we are familiar the most, I think.
Yeah, because it's pretty much interconnected. It can be tied into the data backup, because for most part, if you're running the backup services by your provider, you're gonna probably have the file systems and block storage in scope, which is, I would say, for most stateful applications is going to be your concern. But in all case, you also have some static data in case you need the file level storage. You're gonna be also covered by your provider and the backup services. So it's pretty much simplified. So in this case, the only realistic thing you have to take care of are the nodes in case for your standalone systems, your any type of compute clusters, and images in case you custom build them, which is a common thing, at least that we have most experience with. Luckily, the trend that I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it that for most cloud providers, at least for Kubernetes, you don't have to deal with the etcd nodes and management nodes for some part? Which
yes,
saves a lot of time.
That's true, and again, we have tools here, like from AWS, we have this AWS backup and things like that. But please remember one thing also, when you create your disaster recovery, because, for example, you have the application server, or even worse, the database server, which is not like in managed server, but you have your own. That's why you move to cloud, right? So to use your own stuff on the virtual machines somewhere, not utilize what cloud is giving you, right? Because this is, no, it's not safe, right?
So lift and shift pretty much scenario.
Yeah, anyway, please remember, the way how you do the replication or backup is important also from the perspective of the application and this database and the operating system. Are you sure that if you run standard, I don't know, SQL dump, will it be enough? Will the data be completed? That's
or if you try to port an application which was not designed in a specific version for containerization in Kubernetes, and then you're surprised vendor denies support because you modified it too much.
Exactly. Imagine the situation, you have very huge Kubernetes cluster and you have, like, for example, Rabbit there. And this Rabbit can be moved from one node to another, right? What will do your application in this case? Will it be able to connect to this new instance of Rabbit?
Or even simpler case, Carpenter. What if Carpenter is being shifted around or is broken mid-modification of your autoscaling groups or environments?
Yes.
That's going to cause problems, as far as I remember, and it's not fun to fix Carpenter when it fully breaks.
So scalability is beautiful until the first failure. All right, so databases. This is...
I'm out, thank you. Now, if you haven't figured it out yet, I hate two things when I work with infrastructure. One is networking, second is databases. And if we talk about not liking databases, we're going to omit one specific tool that I have a lot of experience with when it comes to disaster recovery and work with. That is document/MongoDB.
No, we don't talk about this.
We don't talk about this. It's a nightmare, but if it works, it works. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes if you have to rebuild a whole document or MongoDB cluster from a bastion and on downsized instances on production, and you realize you forgot about the fact that the only way to clean up storage on Mongo, in case you need to restore it, is dump and restore. Yeah, you do have 2 hours of panic why your database that you dumped that had 250 gigabytes is now 15 gigabytes. And you thought, what did I do actually wrong? And then you realize, oh, that's meant to be. And why is it also restoring in 10 hours? So, off-topic rant, MongoDB can work. It's just that we have a lot of negative bias given on experience. But let's circle back to actual databases. So, again, it can be tied up into the backup tools that your service provider offers in their tool selection. Again, it can be tied how the compute backup works, because for most part they also can rely on the block level storage or file level storage, like the compute resources and other systems. But in this case, you can also have more specific backups. You can separate the backup windows, at least for the cloud providers. You can specify how long you want to retain the backups, how you can actually where to move them. You can also, in some scenarios, do a multi-region database. At least that is the case with, if I recall, Aurora in AWS and DynamoDB with the global tables. Yeah. And that's where the networking tip that I said comes in, because you can also tie the Route 53 or any kind of DNS tool into...
Two hated tools together, right?
Yeah.
That's
so
perfect.
In case there is a failure detected on a database level, and the DNS service catches that in a health check and fails the health check, you can automatically fail over to the secondary database. So that also can speed up and actually save your NOC engineers a bit of time diagnosing what went wrong. I mean, assuming the backup service works and it's not GitLab case all over again, which it blew up in like 50 seconds, but that is an edge case. Normally, if we talk about the database services, it should work out of the box. The keyword is should. But if you plan it well accordingly, at least in our experience when we have worked with AVS databases, so that being the PostgreSQL, the MySQL, I don't think we had MariaDB anywhere.
Well, no.
We had MSSQL, but
yes.
It has been hosted on EC2. Pretty much for most part, if you run standard database solutions, which are not customized anyway by a provider, it should work fine enough. If there is a more dedicated solution like the AWS Aurora, it might be more suited towards multi-region, so fault torrent architecture, but it also may have some quirks, like the fact that in this specific case, you don't have a lot of choice in terms of the instance classes. So you cannot really pick and choose like a normal scenario. You may be way more limited and balance, of course, of some good things, like the fact that you can easily tier your database in cluster, or you can fail over the database in 1 or 2 clicks.
And now, exclusively for you, the tip, how to avoid this situation like you had, and this like surprise, why this huge database is that small after I backup it and then is even bigger or smaller or whatever. And this comes from 20, almost 7 years of experience. Test your DRs. Then
and
you will be not surprised.
That, read the documentation.
And read the documentation, exactly. All right, enough about databases and data warehouses. It's kind of similar like databases, really.
Yeah, pretty much. The only thing you have to ensure is that in case of Redshift, in case you're running cluster operations on the Redshift or Redshift serverless, you have to ensure that you don't overwhelm the master data nodes and that you don't run out of storage. So that's going to circle back into one of the next points, the monitoring. How do you monitor the monitoring system? I know it sounds like a stupid question, but it's a realistic question you have to ask yourself.
It is a very realistic question.
Like, you want your monitoring system to be running, but how do you actually do that?
Exactly. And, you know, if you have the situation that you do not have any alert for 1 week or something, everything is fine, right?
Until it's not.
Until you realize that your monitoring is down. So again, cloud providers gives you a lot of different tools to control themselves, really. So they trust, you know, themselves like we trust politicians. So they try to control and check everything twice, triple times, and so on and so on and so on. That's why we should connect a couple of tools together to have information from different sources. And to make this very simple, if you work with Nagios, Zabbix, whatever, you should not only cluster those things, but also you should have something what will monitor this Zabbix stuff. But what will monitor the monitoring, which monitor monitoring?
Yeah, we're kind of getting into deep layers here.
Yeah.
One of the things that I also learned in one of our customers that I worked with, specifically for cross-region DRs, was how to tackle the Prometheus fault tolerance. Because as we can deploy Prometheus in high availability, just spread the clusters, or sorry, worker nodes. But how do you want to ensure that you have an easily deployable solution that can work across multiple regions? I wholeheartedly can recommend learning about Thanos and how to connect the Thanos systems into Prometheus, because it not only simplifies the high availability, but in conjunction with proper deployment of Grafana, you can easily achieve cross-region or cross-data zone monitoring capability that doesn't easily fail over. Because, surprise, Grafana actually supports cross-region data sources for cloud providers, so you don't really have to be concerned. Of course, you have to be concerned if the region where you deployed Grafana on fails, but, well, it's a Murphy's Law. It's a matter of when it fails, not if it fails.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I encourage you to start using observability. And not observability by installing Grafana on Kubernetes, because this is not the observability, but using observability as it should. So we all know logs, right? We all know metrics. That's fine. But there is one leg more, which is traces. And traces gives you the possibility to not only pinpoint exactly where the problem is even before it starts, but also to have the recovery from the disaster that the angry customer will come to you. Because here you also need disaster recovery.
And another fun fact regarding observability, in case you need to convince customer how you can actually employ more observability, ask them if they want to save some funds, because usually observability tools allow you to catch things which are underutilized or even unused. And cost utilization is one of the also important factors of the observability pillar.
Exactly. But what we, well, the biggest thing which we remember, especially as the business people, about observability is the price. Unfortunately. All right, let's go further. Now, raise your hand if you want 24/7 availability in your systems. Come on, be brave. All of you want it.
No. Raise your hand if you want to pay for it.
So this is the case. You have to find the balance. You need to understand your business case. This is the first thing. Because let's be honest, okay? We, as IT people, we need our business guys and the business. And they pay us, really, right? So we do not generate money for the company ourselves. I mean, not as a, for example, software house that we sell our software, but as people who try to make sure that our developers, when they come to work, they have place to work and to test what they do, right?
I mean, as we said in the beginning, as we love acronyms, the thing that you can follow in terms of acronyms are two things. First, do your own research, what your company needs. Second of all, your mileage may vary. You have to combine those two factors together to ensure that you actually provide a solution your customer or client needs, and that they get the results that they want. So specific recovery time in this case, specific cost limitation that they have, and the satisfaction, and of course the tested plan and the documentation, because as we all know, documentation is rarely there, and if it's there, it's never correct.
Even if it is like badly written, it's still worth to read. And please understand your systems, because very often we can see that people promise something what is not possible with the system they use, right? Right, so it wasn't so bad, I think, so far, but we didn't finish yet. So what is the whole point of all of it? Why we talk about this? Why we believe this is important? I will not say about things like Black Friday, because we all know what happens in many shops we want to use in Black Fridays.
The unintended
it's not
stress
related
test.
that directly to disaster recovery, but at least to business continuity, right? And the key points of having proper business continuity and DR, well, we have 4, really, right? So you have to start somewhere. Don't say that we will not do anything because we don't have anything, so we don't know where to start. Doesn't matter, start.
There is no shame in admitting you don't have anything. The thing is that you have to focus on is, well, as stages of grief and processing anything that went wrong, you gotta start and you gotta realize, okay, that wasn't correct. Now we gotta work on it. And as long as you work on it and don't forget about it and remember after 6 months when something breaks, you're good.
To encourage you, how many of you knows Kubernetes? How many of you knew Kubernetes 11 years ago? Kubernetes is 10 years old, right? But anyway, my point is, there was a point when you started to learn it. So you didn't say, I don't know it, I will never learn it. The same case is here. Implement proper infrastructure as code and CI/CD. And this will help you not only with disaster recovery, but also with quality of your life.
Yeah, and if anyone from your team is against spending time on documentation or process on the disaster recovery or optimizing the infrastructure as code or CI/CD pipelines, well, you may not use the DR argument, but at least you can try convincing them, hey, it's going to save us a lot of time down the line. It's not going to be the case of spending 10 hours to automate a script which does 10 minutes of manual work. It usually has way more higher returns. But you got to lock the time and optimize things because it's also going to save you in case things go wrong. Because in case that everything goes wrong, everything fails, you have to have, first of all, you need to fully train for that specific scenario. And second of all, you need to have everything working the best shape as it can be. Because in stress, in high intensity cases, like let's say there is a regional failure, if you don't have things nailed down and you don't have them fully optimized and used to the full capacity, there are going to be more things going wrong than just your infrastructure. And it's going to be the process failing, it's going to be either people failing or people doing mistakes just because they're under tension. So limit those risks by optimizing whatever you can with the infrastructure as code. You make it as immutable as possible and as easily deployable as possible, as well as cut down or optimize the CI/CD tools you're using. No matter if it's GitHub Actions, no matter if it's Jenkins, no matter if it's GitLab CI.
And there is one word which is not on this picture, which is also very important. And you all love this word, process. Okay? We should have a process, because this is a part of the DR. And when we have the process for infrastructure as code, this process probably will say no manual changes. Because if we do the manual changes in the infrastructure we created 2 years ago with our infrastructure as code, how many of you will be brave enough to run this infrastructure as code again?
I would say there is more immediate risk. Who else is going to remember what was done in emergency night change a month ago?
All right, third one, run it again and again and again. You have to rerun your plans, even in theory, to be prepared what will happen, what can happen, what you have, what changed from the last day you tested it, and be prepared for it.
But there is an important asterisk here. Please don't do that in production at 4:59 p.m. on Friday. Thank you.
Because we are deploying them. And most importantly, run your disaster recovery test. Because if you will not be prepared for executing it, it means like you almost have nothing, if not completely nothing, really. Because you can be surprised in every single moment, in every single step.
There is a good analogy here to backups, which you probably heard used as a joke or a joke to teach someone about backups. You heard about two types of people regarding backups. There is the type of people that don't do backups, and do backups after everything come down. There is also the third type, which corresponds to the DRs. There are people which plan backups, and it can be translated to the fact that people plan the DRs, but never run them.
Backups.
Run them, please, because it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of nerves, and probably give you a few more years of lifespan from reducing stress, but that's a side benefit.
And also, there is another element which we didn't mention yet. How do you back up your version control system? How many of you do backups for version control systems? 4. And honestly speaking, I'm still surprised that there is so many of you.
That's a bit of food for thought for later.
Exactly. All right, don't be like him. Okay?
We know that we meme a lot in our IT community. We do love humor, and we often just feel like the specific meme. This is fine. No, when everything is on fire from DRs and you don't know what you do, or you're trying to scramble to fix things manually, it's not fine. Please, work on your DRs. It's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of nerves, and probably a lot of money for your customers. And that is one of the stronger arguments you can use against customer, that what is going to be more costly for them? Developing proper DR solutions and ensuring your infrastructure is as fault-tolerant as possible, or paying any kind of fines and compensations to customers and regulatory bodies where applicable.
So a long time ago, when I used to work at bank, we did disaster recovery tests multiple times per year. And believe me, when any kind of failure happens, it was day like always. Not because it happens every day, almost it happens every day, but anyway, we exactly knew what to do, right?
And a bit of an example from the other side of the spectrum, I also was working with the bank for some time ago, where, well, there were no DRs done. There was only specific backup, and we have unfortunately reached a point where we had to scramble at least 4 times a day because, well, the whole bank was going down because of one system which was not worked on and optimized.
Yeah, it may happen always as well. Right, thank you very much. That's all for what we have for you. There are the emails to us. We would like to hear your questions, your stories. You can join also, and you can find us on LinkedIn as well. So please connect with us. We will be happy to.
And in case of anything, you can also find us on a stand on the vendor area, because we are going to be talking there for all day. So in case of anything, feel free to reach out. We don't bite, probably.
Depends. And as you see, we also did the DR.
Yeah, that was kind of a secondary joke.
Thank you.